but I still know where it is. So my curiosity was cured, you know. I just thought it was amazing that I found it back again out of the thousands and thousands of John Deere 60s, and some of them were done went through the crusher already. That Uncle Elmer's was still plugging along yet. Never rebuilt the engine. It still had the original tires on it. They were cracked up pretty bad, but it is what it is, you know. But the gentleman that's got it now, he loves it to death, so it's in a good home.
Yeah, oh, that's good. That's good. So after you became a teenager, then you spent your time
Well,
doing, you worked a lot on cars.
yeah, when I got out of high school, I was 18. Before that, the only car, I didn't work on no cars because it drove mom and dad's if I had a date or you double date with a friend or whatever. After I got out of high school, then mom and dad bought a new car and they gave me their old car. So that was my first car, which was the '54 Ford. Well, I graduated from high school in '59, so the car had some age on it, but it was 4 wheels and it went from point A to point B. So that was good enough, and that's when I was married to my first wife, when I had that Ford. Trying to think now. Probably 63, I think, is when Bonnie and I was divorced in '63. Well, in that meantime, I was working. You know, the time I was 18, I was running heavy equipment and driving one of my dad's dump trucks. And there wasn't no room for me to be farming and helping out farmers. Had a wife and a kid, you know. I wasn't living at home. We had an apartment in town in St. Charles, so I worked. The only car work I did was keeping the Ford running, you know, other than that. Then after I was divorced, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. Well, 68, Shirley and I was married, and we went together for 4 years, 3 years, something like that. Well, that's when I got interested in cars, race cars. And a friend of mine and myself built a '55 Chevy for drag racing, not street, just strictly on drag car. And we played with that for, probably 4 or 5 years. And then, well, Cheryl and I was married in '68. Well, '69, when Cheryl was born, that started to squinch the budget a little bit for buying car parts, so we probably raced that year yet. Then that was about the end of me with my own race car. Now, I did work on, I built some engines for other guys for their cars and things like that, but for me personally, no. It was in them years when we were drag racing that I met a few of the dignitaries, but after that, after '69, I worked on a lot of cars and stuff, but none of them was mine. Several engines I built for guys, for their sons that didn't know how to work on engines and what have you. But they'd bring them to me, and I'd tell them, well, give me a budget and how fast you want to go. It makes a difference, you know. You can't. At that time you could rebuild an engine for about $400, put it back to stock engine. But now if you're going to fuel injection and different camshafts and where's the end? How much money you want to spend? As long as your billfold keeps flowing, I can spend other people's money. But you don't want to do this and then say, well, you owe me $900. Well, my God, I didn't think it was going to cost that much, but there you are. See, give me a budget.
Mm-hmm. And so, where did you race when you
We raced Wentzville and Pacific, Missouri, and it had another town in Illinois, but I can't remember what the name of that town was at. But Pacific and Wentzville were a quarter a mile to strip. The one in Illinois was 1/8 mile, shorter strip. So when we'd run there, we'd always change rear ends for a lower ratio rear end because you didn't have as far to run. And the principle was to get the fastest time from the starting line to the finish line. Where if you only got an 1/8 mile, you got to get that engine cranking in a hurry. Would change the rear end ratio was the way you did that, you know. Then we'd run a quarter mile. We'd take that rear end out and put a higher rear end in to do the quarter mile. And we did pretty good. I mean, we never went to no nationals or nothing, but I was trying to remember, I think C gas was the class we was in, and at that time the record was something like 11.50 in the quarter mile, and I was turning 11.90 in 12 seconds. That's 11.90 seconds in 12 seconds. So we were just, maybe 40 hundredths off the national record. So we were doing good for two local boys, did all right for around here.
So when you raced, how was it set up? I mean, did you have like heats or?
No, you when you first got to the track, you would take time trials, and the only reason for the time trials was it helped you tune your car for when the other cars in your class raced. But you raced side by side on the track, and when we first started, they used a flagman. In the last couple of years, when they developed what they call a Christmas tree, which was a pole, the red light on top, and then there'd be yellow, 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 and the bottom was green. When it turned green, it's time to go. So whichever car you raced the car in your class next to you. Okay, if you won your class, then you got to run for eliminator. Well, maybe, let's say our C gas, which I usually won the C gas class, if we'd race B gas, which were heavier car, it was hopped up too, but he would get a head start, because he was a little bit lower class car. And if you beat him in elimination, you might win a case of oil. We never won any cash and a trophy. Eliminator was a tall trophy. Your class was a little short trophy. But it wasn't the idea what you won. The idea was that you won.
Mm-hmm.
Now what you won is, like nowadays, how they're paying guys to drag race, but it's totally different now. It's absolutely different. I mean, you're still running side by side, but the technology is so advanced now. If you want to use that as a comparison, you can compare the rubber-tired farm tractors to the steam engines. There's no comparison to it whatsoever. So, but it was fun, and that you knew a lot of the guys that you were racing, and you got to know them. And wherever you raced at, you usually every once in a while there'd be a newcomer, but mostly it was about the same people. Not necessarily in your class, but
How many were in your class? Like if at one
Well, it all
event?
depended on how many showed up, you know. I think the most I can ever remember was like 15 cars in the class, in my class, you know. The faster the cars go, the less there are, because you got more money in them. You know, you get into the altered class and the dragster class, there was just not that many because the local people didn't have that much money to. Those are all the dragsters were all national guys. They run all over the country. Gartless and Connie Coletta and Don Padone, they was running all over the country. And the further classes down, you know, like the alters and double A alters and single alters, a few of them was local, but some of them were nationwide too, you know. Woods Brothers and some of those fellas, you know, that, well, they was way faster than us, you know. I never had to race them guys, but I got to see them, got to talk to them.
Were they at the same events or?
Some of them were, not all of them is the same ones, you know. You never knew if they was gonna be there, you know. When I met Don Gartless, that was up in Wentzville, and he just happened to be there that weekend with his dragster. I mean, I didn't know ahead of time he was gonna be there.
But they raced dragsters there?
Yeah, there was some local guys that had dragsters that would race him, you know. Which I knew the local guys too, but I mean, Gartless just happened to be there, you know. Same with Connie Coletta, I met him up at Wentzville too, he just happened to be there that weekend, you know. Wentzville was on Sundays, Pacific was on Saturdays. Saturday and Saturday night was Pacific, and Wentzville was just Sunday, because Wentzville didn't have lights. Yeah, like I say, I don't remember the name of the town in Illinois. It was outside of O'Fallon, Illinois. It wasn't Belleville or whatever. If you'd see it again, I'd know it right away. If I'd see the road sign, I'd remember it, but not so much. But that's how you met them guys. I mean, they wasn't tented off and like they are nowadays. Hey, you had to have a pit. You got to have a pit pass or know somebody to get a pit pass now. Where then, hell, the audience could walk around through the pits during time trials. And when time trials started, if you wasn't a pit crew member, you had to go into the stands. You know, that was maybe that was a safety thing. I don't know, but that's just what the rules was. But during the time trials, everybody could roam around there. They'd come and look at your car and talk to you and so forth and so on, which I did the same thing. But that's how I got to meet them guys, you know, and I didn't think much of it then. I mean, it was fine. You admired for what they was doing and their equipment they had, but didn't put them on a pedestal or nothing, you know. I seen Connie Coletta blow up his engine right up there at Wentzville, and thought to myself, well, his engine blew, I'm still running mine week after week. Of course, there's a lot to it, in what he's doing, you know. Of course, at that time, they didn't run alcohol and things like the nitrous oxide like they do nowadays. It was all pump gas, you know. Ethyl, they called it ethyl, or high octane gas is what it was. Some guys tried to run a little aircraft fuel in it because it's really high octane, but their engines wouldn't last. It wouldn't take that much pressure and heat. It was all trial by error, but it was fun.
Yeah. Well, I remember your car up on a trailer, but
At 55.
yeah, sitting over there.
Someplace I got pictures of it somewhere. Garrett and I standing next to it, and Shirley. And Vicky was a little bitty gal. Vicky was probably I guess she was maybe 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5. Her and Shirley was standing next to the car. You know, it looks so funny when you look at it now. Well, everybody looked younger, naturally. But no, it was fun. And it just got to where, well, then my partner Gary got married, and he started having kids, but he can't. That's the kind of hobby you can't have. You know, sometimes we blow a rear end. Well, you're done. You know, that costs hell. By the time we bought the gears, you know, for the new rear enders, we never did blow an engine, but we did blow rear ends. Might be $100. You know, $50 a piece. Holy criminy sakes, it's a lot of money back then. You know. But
so who was your partner?
Gary Harsmar.
Okay.
And Gary was also a neighbor. Their house was almost right on the corner of McClay and Youngerman. That was the Harsmar farm. In fact, where this house was sitting was part of his mom's farm also. But he was a next door neighbor, and we, from the time we moved out here in '49, and you know, when I met Gary, you know, Gary is about 3 years younger than me. We started bumming around as little kids too, you know. Yeah, we'd walk from one other's house to the other's house, stay all night at my house or stay all night at his house. Of course, Mom and Dad knew it. And then when we got older in high school and stuff, we bummed around together.
And when you say in 1949 you moved out here, you're talking about when your parents moved out to McClay and Harvester Road.
You're right.
Which was at the corner of your grandfather's
Yeah, it was
property.
almost the corner. His ground didn't run to the corner.
Right. The house was on a corner of his property.
Correct.
Not that what.
No, it was on the very corner of his property. Yes. First they built a garage, and we lived in a garage in McClay Road, and while the house was being built. And '49 is when we moved into the house. It was done then. So actually '48 we was on McClay Road, but we was living in a garage. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't the house. It was rough. It had an outside toilet. Well, we made it. You know, made it to school and everything else. The school bus would pick us up at the end of the lane, and we survived. Of course, I'm thinking now, back then, we was probably kind of poor. Mom and Dad had 3 kids. Gerald was born when we lived in St. Charles yet. So Wayne and me and Gerald were, you know, they were raising us. Besides, he bought the property. Besides, he had the house, you know, was building a house. So I'm sure there wasn't a ton of money left over. I don't know. We didn't know the difference. We didn't know we didn't have anything because we had clothes and we had a few pennies to put in a tray at Sunday school, and we didn't know no different, you know, if we had any money or not, you know. Nobody else had anything either, so it didn't pay. The only time you knew anybody had any money is when you went to church. Then you could see the people with money because they parked close to the front of the church, and the rest of us had to park down in the parking lot. People like the Putmans that owned Putman Ford and the Meekers and stuff, they had money, so they had new cars sitting out there, and that's how we got to see a new car. Never will forget Putman Ford when they had come out there with a new car that had power windows in it. Couldn't get over that. It didn't have to crank the windows. And it had air conditioning in it. None of our cars ever had air conditioning, you know. Well, we never had air conditioning in the house. When we grew up, Mom and Dad didn't put the air conditioning in until after us boys were gone. You know, Wayne and I slept upstairs with a big fan in the window, and Gerald slept downstairs, and the fan pulled air from the downstairs windows up the stairway to the upstairs. That was the air. Didn't know no different. Survived.
Yep, well, that's one of the things that I was mentioning about losing the electricity is that we had no air conditioning and no refrigeration, and we were fumbling around. What are we gonna do, kind of thing, and it's just a generation ago, no one had air conditioning.
Right.
In fact, I can even remember not having air conditioning.
I'm sure.
Because I remember Dad put the air conditioning window unit in at Opal. I remember when he did that.
Yeah.
I sat around there and watched it.
It was amazing. That hot air would come in the house and it was cool. It's amazing how that works.
So, I now we can't function without
No.
those comforts, and it just wasn't that long ago when people could. And not only that, they survived just fine.
Well, you'd think it's probably 2 generations. You know, I'm one generation and you're another generation. And you remember some of the 3rd generation hazards with no electric or no air specifically. I can remember, coal heat, with a coal furnace and carrying out the clinkers, clinkers are ashes from the, whereas, your generation didn't, but you didn't have it then, But
Right.
It's strange that you can't remember that kind of stuff, When my generation's all gone, unless somebody's got it wrote down someplace, you would know what a clinker was, My grandkids come and look at that telephone right there with a dial on it, and they can't get over that's a telephone. What the heck? How the heck did that work? Well, in that one's age, that was a modern thing. Well, Shirley's got to put away, but we got one of them handheld ones.
Yeah, Mom and Dad had their.
Or even your mom and dad's got Uncle Elmer's crank phone.
Yeah, they put their modern phone in it, which is the dial one.
Did they do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
you opened up that, and there was the other phone.
I got one like that too, but the actual box and stuff was Uncle Elmer and Aunt Mabel's. When they got rid of that phone up there in Lincoln County, and they got the more modern phone like this black one here, I don't remember how he did it, but he talked him out of that cranking phone. But anyways, he did it. So,
Yep, that was our phone. People would come over, the phone would be ringing, and it'd be inside that box.
Yeah.
You'd be looking around. How the heck do you answer this thing? I open it up. It's inside.
yeah,
So yeah, that was always kind of fun.
that was kind of
Well, Uncle Dallas, I thank you for
that was quite all right.
going over that.
I don't know if I helped
you.
you any, but
Sure. I was got a lot of good information about how things worked, and good to know that you use the draft horses, and because I'll go to estate sales now and they'll have some of that tack and stuff, and people will talk about it, and I'm like, I don't think that's what that is. They'll call it something,
sure.
and I don't know if that's what that is, but
It's surprising.
but every little piece has its own name.
It's got its own name, which I don't recall all of it. I just remember the traces, they call it traces, which is 2 big metal straps that ran from the horse collar back to a single tree or a double tree, which would be the wagon part, and the end of the traces had chains that you would link up, chains to hooks on the, so the horses would pull even, you know. Because some horses took, the way I understand it, took different strides. So the longer stride horse would have a shorter chain on his traces than the other one. Of course, the owner of the horses knew which was which. And Grandpa would always tell me which hook to.
He knew the setup.
He knew the setup, and that's.
This is what you need to do. You need to hook this one up like this, and this one up like
right.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it was just the way they did things, and that's how I learned, you know, from what he told me and showed me. Like all the names as if I don't know, but I do remember him repairing all his harnesses himself. You know, every once in a while something would tear, and he'd have to rivet it back together, which over at the shop, the only thing I got left that I know of was the deal he used to punch holes with. Looks like a pliers, only in a start with the different size holes. But he never had fancy brass harnesses or anything.
What else did he use to fix it?
He had his own blacksmith shop. He was a forge. He did his own horseshoeing. Firing, they call it now. If I remember right, he bought the horseshoes and the mule shoes. They were different. The mule shoes were different horseshoes, but the hoofs smaller. But Grandpa would have to heat them up in the forge and reshape them. And but they already had the nailed holes in them, but he'd have to reshape them to fit the hoof of the horse. I remember him trimming the hoofs of the horses. I don't have any of those tools anymore or nothing like that, but I can remember, I didn't do it, but I remember seeing him do it. I spent a lot of time down at Grandpa and Grandma's. Because, well, when we moved out here, it was just a dirt lane from our house down to their house. And Mom always said whenever she couldn't find me, she knew I was down at Grandma's. I'd just take off walking. I'd walk down there. And then I'd be piddling around down there with him, you know, because there wasn't nothing to do at home. You know, Dad was working, and I don't know where Brother Wayne was at, but I spent a lot of time down at Grandpa and Grandma's, you know. And I guess that's how I got familiar and got to see all that, how he did it, you know. I didn't do it, but seen him.
So he had an anvil and...
Yeah, had an anvil, and Dad ended up with an anvil, and somebody stole it from Dad's place over there. I remember the anvil. He had it on a big wooden block from a tree, and had railroad spikes drove in it to hold it to the block. The anvil I'm talking about. But any of the tools, I can remember a long handle like a pincher's he had that he hold them hot horseshoes with and hold them over the anvil. And I thought at one time Dad had the forge that he cranked by hand, but I don't know.
I think I had that.
Oh, well, that's good. I don't know whatever happened to it. I know Dad had it, and I didn't know.
It was behind the
that shed.
Shed behind the garage.
Well, that's good that you got that.
Grandma said that she wanted me to
I wish you'd have got the anvil too.
So I took that. I don't remember seeing an anvil.
Well,
I've been very interested in that.
Yeah, I remember it. Dad had it sitting on the corner of the shop. Sat there for years and years and years and years. And who in the hell ever took that, I don't know. But they got and how they did it, I don't know. But they left the tree stump there. They got the railroad spikes out and just took the anvil. And I believe, if I remember right, that was do they come in pounds, like
Mhm.
was 120 pound? It had its stance, it was forged right in
It
there.
depends on how, it depends.
It was big.
Because there's a numbering system. Like the British would have like a 1, a 3, and then it'd be so many stones, and the stone was like I don't remember, it was like 40 pounds or
I
something
see,
like
whatever
that. And then you would add those up, and the last one was just regular pounds.
Well, I know this
So I
one,
think there's
this one was probably
But I don't remember exactly.
not
what
quite
the-
3 feet long, but it was a little more than 2 feet long from the tip to the, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I know it was heavy. I mean, I never lifted it, but you could see it was heavy. It even had the little square thing with the wedge sticking up on it that
Mhm.
when the metal was
Already-
hot, he could
Yeah, cut off tool.
cut off with that. I remember that wedge sticking in that square hole. And there was a round hole in it too.
Mhm. It's a Pritchell hole.
I don't know, but but like the tools he had for the forge and stuff, he had a few of them tools, but I can't help you there, Don.
Mm.
I don't know, just like when he trimmed the manes of the horses, he had a scissors type thing that was hard to explain, but it was a big V-shaped blade, 2 of them, and one of them slid alongside the other one, that you,
And it just had a spring like on
the end of it was a big round part of it, and it wasn't a spring, but it was spring loaded like it was.
Right.
Well,
It
that's a big-
served as a spring on the.
Yeah, and I can remember him sharpening them blades on that to cut the horse manes, and he'd cut the tails of some of the cattle too. That was supposedly to keep from, in case the cow was taking a dump when you was milking it, kept it from slinging the manure all around, because there wasn't no hair for it to catch on, but the tails wasn't bald, they just cut them shorter
Mm-hmm.
so they wouldn't drag in the ground, or horses the same way. His horse tails were always trimmed short. Just things keep coming back to me now that I'm thinking about it, you know. But like I said, he was, my grandpa was pretty well self-sufficient with everything, you know, his whole lifestyle and where he lived and what have you. It's a shame all of it's gone now, but progress, I guess, is what progress is.
Mm-hmm.
But a few things I can remember, like his tractor and his, man, I'd love to have that old 31 Plymouth business scoop nowadays, but he sold that and he bought a 49 Chevy, brand new from Meager Chevrolet. There was a 2-door sedan. It wasn't a business coupe, so it had a back seat. That 49 Chevy did. And I can remember, once again, I was with him when he went to pick this new car up, and I remember that salesman telling him, now, Mr. Gronefeld, you can drive this car 50 to 60 mile an hour for 100 miles or more and never hurt it. And Grandpa said, boy, you'll never see this car do no 50 mile an hour. And he wasn't lying. The only time it went over 50 is when, that I know of, is when Wayne drove Grandpa and Grandma to either North Carolina or South Carolina to see one of our cousins. And Brother Wayne drove them down there in the 49 Chevy. Otherwise, when Grandpa would go to town and back and stuff, it was 30, 35 mile an hour. That's what he drove, you know. But I know damn well Wayne drove faster than that going down there, but remember that salesman telling Grandpa that. It was something, you know. Whatever happened to that car, I don't know. after he died, well, he didn't drive for several years before, because his eyesight got so bad, and he had cataracts real bad, never had them taken off. That'd be going to the doctor. You can't go to the doctor for nothing. Dad found a Rambler, a 4-door Rambler, and it was yellow, that he got for Grandma to drive, and she drove that until quite a while, you know. And when Grandpa got where he couldn't drive no more, well, then they sold that car too. You know. But yeah, that's 49 Chevy. That was, you could drive that 50, 55 mile an hour and never heard it. Boy, you ain't never, this car ain't never gonna see it. And he traded in. I was with him, so he traded into Plymouth for that 49 Chevy. Well, I couldn't have bought it anyways, and didn't think about it then anyhow, you know. I'd love to have it now though, but it is what it is. I'd like to have a lot of the cars that I had when I was younger, but I don't have now. It'd be worth some money now, but
Oh yeah.
not then. You just sold them or traded them in. That's what you done with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
All right, Uncle Dallas. Well, thank you again.
Okay.
And I think we're probably about out of juice over here.
Okay. Well, I don't want to run you out of juice.